What if the woman you mocked, the woman you humiliated for looking too poor to sit among you, turned out to be the very owner of the airline you were flying on? They judged her by her shoes. They laughed at her faded jacket. They thought kindness was optional. That dignity was reserved for the wealthy. But in the next few moments, their entire world would come crashing down. Stay with us. Because what happens next will change the way you see respect. Forever. The heavy glass doors of Los Angeles International Airport sighed open as Amelia Hayes stepped inside, dragging a battered Navy suitcase behind her, her sneakers scuffing against the polished marble floors. Around her, travelers in crisp suits and designer coats swept by, eyes flicking past her worn jeans and faded sweatshirt as if she were invisible. She moved through the terminal without fanfare, her hood drawn up, her posture unassuming, like a shadow slipping through the noise. When she approached the Astra Airways counter, the agent glanced at her skeptically, hesitated, but then checked her ticket and handed it back with a forced smile that didn't quite hide the confusion behind her eyes. Amelia tucked the ticket into her pocket without a word and continued toward the private security lane reserved for first-class passengers, her heart steady, her hands loose at her sides, even as whispers began to rise around her like smoke. In the boarding area, the luxury was palpable. Gleaming leather seats, complimentary champagne, designer luggage lined neatly along the walls, and every eye turned to her the moment she entered, drawn as if by gravitational pull to the anomaly in their polished universe. A woman in pearls and a man in a tailored suit exchanged glances, their eyebrows arching high, subtle sneers curving their lips. Amelia ignored them. She found an empty seat in the far corner, tucked her bag between her feet, and pulled a dog-eared book from her jacket pocket, flipping it open with a hand that didn't tremble even under the weight of their silent judgment. Across the room, a stewardess in a sharp navy uniform leaned toward the counter agent, whispering behind a manicured hand, and both of them turned to stare. Amelia felt it all. The stares, the murmurs, the cold wall of exclusion. But she kept reading, her face a calm mask. She wasn't here to make a scene. She wasn't here to prove anything. She was simply here to board her flight, to sit in the seat she had paid for, like anyone else. But in this world, appearances were everything. And to them, she didn't belong. Not yet. Not until the truth they couldn't see would rip their perfect little illusions apart, leaving nothing but the raw, undeniable facts they had tried so hard to ignore. The gate agent called for first-class boarding, her voice polished and pleasant, and as the well-heeled passengers gathered their designer luggage and sauntered forward, Amelia rose quietly from her corner, tucking her book away, gripping her worn suitcase handle tighter as she joined the line. The stares intensified, sharpened, whispers now morphing into open murmurs of disgust. The man in the tailored suit elbowing his companion and muttering, "They must be lowering standards these days," while the woman in pearls chuckled coldly and said, "Probably wandered into the wrong line." As Amelia approached the scanner, Victoria, the head flight attendant, regal in her Astra Airways uniform, stepped forward, her posture stiff, her smile tight with polite contempt. She held out a hand, stopping Amelia before she could board, her voice ringing clear enough for half the lounge to hear. "Ma'am, first class is reserved for premium passengers only. Economy is boarding at gate 32. Around them, phones lifted, cameras clicking with the excitement of a humiliation about to be immortalized. Amelia calmly pulled out her boarding pass, offering it without a word, but Victoria didn't even glance at it, already waving security closer with a manicured flick of her wrist. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Victoria said loudly, her tone dripping with condescension. "We can help you find your correct gate. No need to be embarrassed." Laughter rippled through the first-class lounge, low and cruel, the kind of laughter that strips flesh from bone. A teenager in a Harvard sweatshirt openly filmed Amelia, whispering, "Watch this, it's going viral." Victoria snatched the ticket from Amelia's hand, finally scanning it. And when the green light flashed, confirming her first-class seat, a visible flinch rippled across her face, quickly smoothed over with a brittle laugh. "Ah, must be a clerical error," she said, her voice tightening. Another flight attendant leaned in, whispering urgently, but Victoria waved her off, her pride too heavy to back down now. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she pressed, louder, harsher. "We have a certain dress code standard in our premium cabins. You'll have to move to the economy unless you can present proper credentials." The finality in her tone snapped through the room like a whip. Amelia stood still, the weight of 100 judging eyes crashing against her body like waves against rock. She felt every sneer, every smirk, every ounce of satisfaction radiating from the polished crowd around her, who saw in her humiliation a reaffirmation of their own fragile superiority. Still, Amelia did not speak. Still, she did not flinch. Still, she held her ground as they stripped away her dignity piece by piece, believing they had won, believing they had the right. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that the woman they mocked wasn't standing there by accident. She was standing there by design, and the reckoning they had just set into motion would be far greater than anything their shallow laughter could ever hope to withstand. Victoria's smile grew sharper, crueler, as she turned toward the watching crowd, gesturing grandly to security now approaching, with heavy boots and blank faces. The act staged as if removing Amelia would somehow restore the sanctity of the luxury they believed she had stained. "Escort her to the economy gate, please," Victoria announced, her voice cutting and clear, an executioner delivering her sentence. Amelia tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, feeling the heat of hundreds of eyes, the weight of silent verdicts already rendered against her. She didn't resist as the 2 security guards flanked her, each placing a hand just near enough to her arms to imply force without yet using it, her body a quiet island amid the churning sea of amusement and disdain. The man in the tailored suit clapped mockingly as Amelia was turned away from the boarding tunnel, his companion laughing into her glass of complimentary champagne. "Next time, bring a Gucci bag at least." Someone jeered from behind. Phones were up again, capturing the scene from every angle, recording every second of her so-called downfall, greedy for the instant validation of likes, shares, and cruel comments. A young woman near the corner raised her voice just enough to be heard, dripping venom through a fake smile. "Maybe they'll give her some peanuts for the road." Another burst of laughter followed, sharp and bright, a knife disguised as music. Amelia's chest rose and fell slowly, her pulse steady despite the red-hot shame they tried to pour over her like tar. She walked the short distance back into the waiting lounge with her head held high, every step deliberate, her silence thicker, heavier, more deafening than any scream could have been. Victoria smoothed her skirt, satisfied, already turning back to the polished line of appropriate passengers now allowed to board, certain that justice, their twisted version of it, had been served. In their minds, Amelia Hayes was finished, dismissed, defeated, a nobody foolish enough to believe she belonged among the kings and queens of the skies. But even as she disappeared from their sight, a flicker of something ancient stirred beneath the surface of their polished, fragile world. A silent earthquake that had already begun to crack the marble floor beneath their feet. Their mistake wasn't just their cruelty. Their mistake was not knowing exactly who they had tried to erase. And when the truth came crashing down, it would not ask permission. It would shatter everything they thought they knew. As Amelia's footsteps faded down the boarding bridge, the laughter began to subside, replaced by a self-satisfied hum of conversations among the passengers still basking in their victory. Victoria smoothed her blazer with one hand, already moving to welcome the next line of properly dressed travelers, her polished smile sliding back into place. But before she could usher the next group forward, a commotion near the security gate snapped every head in the lounge around. A man in a sleek black suit was sprinting, not walking, sprinting, through the terminal, dodging carts and startled bystanders with reckless urgency, his polished shoes slamming against the marble like gunshots. His badge flashed briefly as he pushed past stunned security guards, the embroidered crest of Astra Airways glinting under the fluorescent lights. Victoria blinked in confusion, stepping back instinctively as the man skidded to a stop in front of the boarding gate, breathless, hair askew, desperation etched into every line of his face. It was William Cole, CEO of Astra Airways, a name that normally inspired awe and trembling in boardrooms and airports alike. And now, here he was, looking ready to tear the terminal apart. His eyes scanned the boarding area wildly until they landed on Victoria. His voice cracked the heavy silence like a whip. "Where is she?" he barked, every word vibrating with a rage that made Victoria's blood turn to ice. "Where is Ms. Hayes?" Victoria opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out, only a strangled croak. William didn't wait for her to recover. He turned to the stunned security guard still lingering by the lounge entrance. "Bring her back," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "Immediately." Murmurs rose like smoke from the crowd, confusion rippling through the ranks of wealthy passengers who had so confidently judged Amelia just moments before. Victoria regained her voice, a tremor betraying her carefully maintained mask. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding. She didn't have the proper appearance for first-class standards. I was following protocol." William turned toward her so sharply that she flinched. His voice dropped, low and lethal. "You didn't recognize the owner of this airline." The words landed like thunder. A gasp tore through the room, a collective intake of breath as the meaning settled like a weight in every chest. Amelia Hayes, the woman they had mocked, humiliated, dismissed, was not a charity case, not a mistake, not an intruder. She was the new owner of Astra Airways. Every mocking word, every cruel laugh, every recorded humiliation now stood like a noose tightening around their throats. And as the security guards rushed to retrieve her from the waiting area, the golden facade of first class shattered into jagged, irreparable pieces. Victoria swayed on her feet, her mouth opening and closing uselessly, her carefully curated world tilting dangerously on its axis. Around her, passengers paled, clutching their designer handbags and luxury briefcases as if they could somehow shield themselves from the avalanche of consequences they had so carelessly unleashed. And in the distance, small but growing closer with every step, came the sound of Amelia's sneakers against marble. Not rushed, not hesitant, but steady, relentless, inevitable. The woman they had cast out was coming back, but this time, it would not be on their terms. This time, she would not be the one asked to leave. This time, she would be the one who decided who stayed, and who was thrown out into the cold. The hum of nervous whispers grew louder as Amelia Hayes stepped back into the first-class lounge, her battered suitcase still in hand, her posture unchanged, her face calm in a way that made the opulence around her look suddenly cheap and artificial. The security guards flanked her now, like protective sentinels, and at the center of it all stood William Cole, the CEO himself, waiting with a tension that made every watching passenger hold their breath. As Amelia approached, William moved first. Without hesitation, without pride, he dropped to one knee on the polished marble floor, bowing his head low in front of her, a gesture so shocking, so raw, that a collective gasp broke out across the room. Gasps, followed by the frantic flutter of phones being lowered in shame, and the bitter taste of fear rising in throats that had once laughed so freely. William's voice rang out, steady but thick with emotion. "Ms. Hayes, I offer you my deepest apologies, both personal and professional," he said, lifting his gaze to meet hers with unflinching respect. "You are the rightful owner of Astra Airways, and we have failed you today." The words hung there, electric and heavy, slamming into the elegant passengers like hammer blows. Victoria, the proud head stewardess, went pale, her hands trembling at her sides as the realization sank in that her career, her reputation, her future now rested in the hands of the woman she had humiliated before an audience of thousands. No, millions, because the cameras had been rolling, and the internet forgets nothing. William rose to his feet, turning toward the wide-eyed crowd. "For those unaware," he said, his voice taking on the cool authority of a man used to commanding boardrooms and bending markets. Ms. Amelia Hayes recently completed a quiet acquisition of controlling interest in Astra Airways. She is not merely a first-class passenger, she is the heart and future of this airline. Shock crashed through the lounge like a tidal wave. The man in the tailored suit stumbled back, clutching his briefcase to his chest. The woman in pearls choked on a gasp. Even the young man in the Harvard sweatshirt lowered his phone, his bravado shriveling in the face of a reality he could no longer deny. Amelia said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence, the same silence they had once mistaken for shame, now echoed with a power that filled the room to its soaring ceilings. Her eyes scanned the crowd slowly, methodically, watching their faces crumble under the weight of their own prejudice. They had seen only what they wanted to see. And now, they had to live with what they had done. Victoria tried to speak, a desperate apology fumbling past her lips. But it was too late. The truth had been spoken. The lines had been drawn. The woman they had judged by her sneakers and faded jacket now stood above them, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it in a way none of them ever could. And this was only the beginning of the reckoning to come. The weight of humiliation thickened the air until it became suffocating, each second stretching unbearably as the truth settled, irreversible and sharp. Amelia stood quietly, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd, her calm presence more damning than any outburst could have been. She didn't scream. She didn't demand vengeance. She simply existed, unshaken, undeniable, and that was enough to unmake them. William Cole, standing by her side with rigid shoulders and a grim face, turned to Victoria first. "Effective immediately," he said, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Victoria Harrington, you are terminated from Astra Airways. Your conduct is in violation of every standard this company upholds." His words were clipped, final, allowing no room for pleading. Victoria opened her mouth, her perfectly painted lips trembling, but nothing came out. The security guards at her sides shifted forward, their message clear. Victoria's hands dropped limply, her polished image crumbling as she was quietly escorted out, her heels clicking hollowly against the marble floor, a sound that would haunt her long after this day. But William wasn't finished. He turned to the rest of the passengers who had laughed, jeered, filmed. "We at Astra Airways reserve the right to refuse service to individuals who violate our core principles of respect and dignity." He continued coldly, "Effective immediately. Those who engaged in the harassment and public humiliation of Ms. Hayes are permanently banned from flying with our airline." His hand moved toward a clipboard, handing a sheet to the head of airport security. "These names have already been recorded." A ripple of panic broke through the crowd. The man in the tailored suit lunged forward, his voice high and desperate. "You can't do that, Moose. I'm a platinum member." The woman in pearls shrieked about discrimination. The young Harvard graduate stammered excuses about it being just a joke. But the security officers were already moving, pulling boarding passes, escorting them out one by one, their protests growing more pathetic with each step toward the exit. Reporters who had lingered nearby, sensing something amiss, now rushed forward, cameras flashing furiously, microphones shoved toward the fallen elites. Headlines began forming even before the first disgraced passenger was pushed through the terminal doors. First-class elites banned from mocking airline owner. "Kindness isn't optional," the fall of the Sutton Lounge snobs. Within hours, the internet would be ablaze. The videos once meant to mock Amelia were now evidence of their own downfall. The brands they endorsed dropped them. Followers abandoned them in droves. Public apologies flooded social media, but none could erase the footage or the stain that would cling to their names forever. Inside the terminal, the first-class lounge stood eerily still, where once there had been smugness. Now there was only silence. And standing at the center of it all, Amelia Hayes didn't smirk, didn't gloat. She simply turned to William, nodded once, and whispered, "Let's board." Because the true victory wasn't in crushing them. It was in proving, without a word. That dignity, once weaponized against her, would now rebuild a world where appearances meant nothing, and character meant everything. The empire they thought they ruled had crumbled at her feet. Oh, and she had barely lifted a finger. As the debris of broken pride was swept away, a quieter story began to emerge. One not built on downfall, but on the simple, stubborn strength of kindness. Not everyone in the first-class lounge had laughed. Not everyone had turned their face away in scorn. And now, in the bright and merciless light of truth, those small acts of decency stood taller than the tallest towers of wealth. Among the few who had chosen grace over cruelty was Mia Reynolds, a young flight attendant barely a year into her job, who had offered Amelia a quiet smile when others had turned their backs. When Victoria had tried to block Amelia from boarding, it was Mia who had hesitated, her eyes flickering with discomfort, her fingers twitching as if itching to intervene but paralyzed by hierarchy. There had been another, Mr. Davis, an elderly gentleman seated near the window, who had nodded politely at Amelia when she first arrived, sliding his briefcase aside to make space without a second thought, treated her as he would anyone else, and finally, a teenage girl, Sophie Lane. No relation to Amelia, who had stared wide-eyed at the unfolding cruelty, her phone in her lap, unused, her hands clenching around a book rather than lifting a camera. When the list of those to be banned had been handed to security, these three names were notably absent. Instead, William Cole had quietly pulled them aside, leading them through a private corridor away from the chaos. In a small, sunlit room beyond the gate, Amelia stood waiting for them, a soft smile warming her face for the first time that day. "You didn't know who I was," Amelia said simply, her voice carrying the weight of all that had happened. "And still, you chose respect. You chose kindness." Mia blinked rapidly, tears threatening at the edges of her vision. Mr. Davis straightened his jacket, his voice rough with emotion. "It was never a choice," he said. "It's just how decent people behave." Amelia nodded, her chest tightening with a gratitude too deep for words. William Cole stepped forward then, clearing his throat. "Effective immediately," he announced. "Mia Reynolds is promoted to Senior First-Class Service Manager. Mr. Davis, you will receive lifetime elite status on all Astra Airways flights. And Sophie Lane, if you ever want to intern with us, the door is open." The stunned gratitude in their faces was reward enough, but Amelia wasn't finished. She turned toward them, her eyes shining. "More than promotions, more than free flights. What matters is this," she said quietly. "In a world obsessed with appearances, you chose to see people for who they are, and that will always be the foundation of everything we build from here." In that small room, under the muted glow of afternoon sun slanting through the windows, a new chapter began. Not one written by the wealthy and the loud, but by the quiet loyalty of hearts that refused to compromise. The empire Amelia Hayes would now lead would not be gilded with pretense. It would be built on the simple, unshakable truth that kindness, unseen and uncelebrated, is still the greatest force in the world. The following morning, as headlines blazed across every major outlet and the internet buzzed with outrage, apologies, and stunned admiration, Amelia Hayes stood before a gathering of Astra Airways executives, flight crew, and staff in a sleek glass auditorium overlooking the Pacific Ocean. She wore the same simple navy jacket, the same scuffed sneakers, refusing to hide behind silk suits or gleaming jewelry, her presence unadorned but carrying a gravity that silenced even the most senior board members the moment she entered the room. Cameras were banned. There would be no flashy press conference, no rehearsed speeches dripping with corporate polish. This was for the people who had kept the airline running, not for the world outside. Amelia stepped up to the podium, her hands resting lightly on the smooth wood, her voice steady and low as she spoke. "Yesterday," she began, her eyes sweeping the room, meeting every gaze head-on, "was not about me. It was about a sickness that has crept into the way we see each other, a sickness that measures worth by the cut of a suit, the brand on a handbag, the shine of a shoe." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. I stood in your lounge. I watched as people decided, without asking a single question, who deserved dignity and who did not. And I watched how a few of you, only a few, chose kindness even when you thought no one important was watching. She drew a slow breath. You know now who I am, but my title is not what matters. It never has. What matters is the standard we set from this day forward. For every passenger, for every colleague, for every human being who passes through the gates of Astra Airways. Behind her, the new company motto illuminated the towering wall of glass in bold silver letters. Dignity is not a luxury. It is a right. A hush fell over the room, deeper than awe, deeper than fear. It was the hush of people realizing that something fundamental had shifted, that the rules of the old world, built on silent cruelty and unspoken hierarchies, would no longer reign here. Amelia leaned slightly forward, her voice soft but unbreakable. From this day on, respect will not be conditional. Hospitality will not be for sale. The way you treat a stranger is not their wealth, not their fame, will determine your place in this company. A ripple of emotions surged through the audience. Pride, shame, hope, blending into something raw and real. Amelia stepped back from the podium, her message delivered not with fury, but with the quiet, relentless certainty of a tide that no wall could hold back. There were no standing ovations, no thunderous applause, just a deep, collective breath as the people of Astra Airways stood taller, felt the old illusions fall away like dust, and understood that they had not merely witnessed a speech, they had witnessed the beginning of a revolution. One carried not by banners or riots, but by the stubborn, invincible power of quiet dignity reclaimed. Amelia Hayes didn't need to raise her voice to change the world. She only needed to remind them of something they had forgotten. That true power doesn't scream, it whispers, oh, and the world still listens. The days that followed were nothing short of transformative, not just for Astra Airways, but for every soul who had witnessed what unfolded that afternoon in the first-class lounge. The footage that had once been filmed to mock Amelia Hayes was now being shared with awe and reverence, replayed over and over across news stations, filling comment sections, lighting up forums, not as a story of humiliation, but of quiet, devastating justice. Headlines read, "The woman they mocked now owns their future. Kindness is the new currency. A new queen of the skies has risen." Yet while the world buzzed and speculated, Amelia refused to step into the limelight that others so desperately wanted to thrust upon her. She declined interviews, turned down magazine covers, and rejected the glittering invitations from celebrities who suddenly wanted to bask in her orbit. Fame had never been her goal. Neither had vengeance. She knew better than anyone that attention was fickle, that today's heroine could become tomorrow's gossip if you fed the wrong flames. Instead, she stayed the course she had set on that quiet podium. Rebuilding Astra Airways from its foundation outward, one soul at a time. Internally, sweeping changes took root. Mandatory empathy and dignity training became part of every employee's progression path, from the lowest ramp agent to the highest executive. Secret shopper programs were revamped not to catch workers failing, but to catch them succeeding. To reward acts of unseen kindness, of humanity under pressure, hiring practices shifted, prioritizing character as fiercely as skill. Promotions were earned not only by results, but by how those results were achieved. Did you uplift those around you? Did you listen when no one else did? Did you show respect when it was least convenient? Meanwhile, for passengers, the airline experience itself began to change. First class was no longer marketed with glossy images of exclusivity and whispered privilege. New branding campaigns appeared, showing travelers of all walks of life. Young, old, rich, modest, treated with the same grace, the same deference once reserved for the few. Across airports, the new slogan shone bright against walls and gates. Everyone deserves to fly with dignity. At first, there was skepticism. Cynics called it a PR stunt. Competitors scoffed. But as months passed, the impact became undeniable. Astra Airways' customer loyalty soared. Profits followed, not because they pandered to the powerful, but because they reminded the world of something it had nearly forgotten: how good it feels to be seen, to be treated not as a wallet or a status symbol, but simply as a person. 1 year after that infamous day, Amelia sat quietly in the back of a newly christened aircraft, watching as a young gate agent in New York gently knelt to speak to an elderly woman struggling with her carry-on. No cameras, no audience, just quiet kindness, offered freely. It was there, in those small, invisible moments, that true change had taken hold. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the soft hum of the engines fill her chest, and smiled, not the smile of victory over her enemies, but the deeper, quieter satisfaction of having built something real, something lasting, something that would outlive any scandal or viral moment. Amelia Hayes had not just survived their cruelty, she had transformed it. She had turned their scorn into seeds. And now, everywhere she looked, gardens of dignity were blooming in the places they had once tried to burn her to the ground. And in a world so quick to mock, so desperate to divide, her story had become a living, breathing reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is choose to be kind. They thought power was wearing a Rolex. They thought greatness was flashing a boarding pass. But true power walked in quietly, worn in the battered sneakers of a woman they tried to erase. Amelia Hayes didn't need to humiliate them back. She didn't need to raise her voice. She simply stood still and let the truth rip their masks away. In a world obsessed with appearances, maybe it's time we remember the ones you overlooked today. Might just own everything you dream of tomorrow. Respect isn't earned by wealth. It's owed to every soul you meet.